Why the Isley Brothers walked away from Motown and started over. 10 moments in the story of how the Isley Brothers walked out of Motown and started over.
In your feet. Don't worry about the music, baby.
Not because they failed there, they had a gold record there. They were handed the best writers in the building. They left anyway. Because being successful somewhere and being valued somewhere are not the same thing. They learned that difference in 3 years. Let me tell you who they were. Before Motown, before Detroit, before any of it, there were 4 brothers in a house in Cincinnati, Ohio. O'Kelly Jr., Rudolph, Ronald, and Vernon. Their father, O'Kelly Sr., was a Navy veteran and a former vaudevillian, and he was the one who pushed them to sing together. Their mother, Sally, was a church pianist and organist. They started performing in Cincinnati in 1954, and they were good enough, fast enough, to take first place on the national television competition, Ted Mack's Original Amateur Hour. 4 boys, a gospel quartet, winning on national television before the oldest of them could legally sign a contract. Picture the photograph that must exist somewhere from that year. 4 brothers in matching suits their mother pressed. That is the beginning of one of the longest careers in American music, and almost nobody alive has seen it. And then the family lost Vernon. He was 11 years old. He was hit by a vehicle while he was riding his bicycle. Every hit, every fight with every label, every decision these men made about who was going to control their music. All of it happens on the other side of a family burying a child. It was their mother who told them to keep going. They continued as a trio. Ronald was the one they turned to for the lead. That voice, the one you know from 50 years of records, exists in that form because a boy died and the group had to reorganize around the loss. Their father died in 1957. The family moved to Teaneck, New Jersey, to be closer to New York. Remember that town. It comes back. In 1959, they landed with RCA, and they wrote and recorded Shout. Now here is the part almost everyone gets wrong. Shout was only a modest hit for them at the time. It reached number 47 on the Hot 100. 47. For a song that is now played in every stadium in this country. For a song that a Scottish teenager named Lulu would later ride into the British top 10. And I want to be clear about what I'm saying. That is not a footnote. That is the pattern. Arriving in 1959 and refusing to leave for a decade. They make the thing. The world takes the thing. The credit shows up somewhere else, later, in somebody else's hands. 1962. Still a trio, still hungry, still driving between shows in a car. And they cut a record called Twist and Shout. It went to number 17 on the Hot 100 and number 2 on the R&B chart. Not just a hit, a genuine one. Number 2 R&B is a record that fills rooms. That is the sound of a career finally catching, and then the cover started. The Beatles took Twist and Shout and had far greater commercial success with it than the Isleys ever did. Lulu did the same with Shout. The Yardbirds did it with Respectable. The Human Binds did it with Nobody But Me. Four separate hit records by four different white acts, built directly on arrangements three brothers from Cincinnati worked out first. And I want to be precise here, because this is exactly where people reach for outrage and get the story wrong. Nobody stole anything. Covers were legal. Covers were the normal traffic of the era, in every direction. That is not the injustice, and I will not pretend it is. The injustice is the arithmetic underneath it. Because here is what was happening simultaneously. After they left RCA in 1962, the Isleys had Twist and Shout, and then nothing. They toured constantly. Their singles missed the charts. Sit inside that for a second. You are on the road every night. You are the group whose records other people are getting rich reproducing. You hear your own arrangement come out of a radio in a diner in some town you're passing through. Except it isn't your voice, and the money is going to an address you've never seen. That is a specific kind of exhausting, being the source of everyone else's hit and having none of your own. Shout did eventually sell. It became a million seller in the long run, but long run money does not pay for a band in 1963. Long run money arrives after the humiliation is already finished. If Twist and Shout was in your house growing up, if you spent 30 years thinking it was a Beatles song, you already understand what I'm saying. And that gap between what you know and what happened is the entire reason this channel exists. Real talk, only 9% of you are subscribed. That hurts. We're spending hours digging through archives, fact-checking every detail, bringing these stories back to life. And if you're watching this far, you clearly care. So hit subscribe. It's free and takes 2 seconds. Now, to my subscribers, barely any of you have joined the membership. And honestly, that stings even more. You know the work we put in. You keep coming back. If these videos have ever made you feel something, if this music means something to you, join the membership. It's $1 coffee a month, and it's the only way we keep this going. Let's build this together. All right, back to it. 1964. And this is the entry that tells you exactly who these men were. They were not artists who complained and waited for a better offer. In 1964, frustrated with their inability to break through, they took a step that was close to unheard of for black performers at the time. They formed their own record company. They named it Teaneck, shortened from Teaneck, New Jersey, the town where Ron had settled. Let me be clear about what I am saying. 1964, the Civil Rights Act is being signed that summer, and three brothers who cannot get a follow-up hit look at the situation and conclude that the answer is not a better contract, and it is not a better producer. The answer is ownership, their name on the label, their decisions in the room. The first Teaneck single was Testify. They recorded it on March 21st, 1964 at Atlantic Studio in New York and released it that June. They wrote it, they produced it themselves, and there was a guitarist standing in that room.
world about? You got soul.
In 1963, they had hired a young Army veteran from Seattle. They bought him his first Fender Stratocaster. They let him live in the family home.
Don't it make you wanna shout? Don't be ashamed.
He was going by Jimmy James at the time. The world would come to know him as Jimi Hendrix, and his first recordings were made with the Isley Brothers. Now hold on to this next detail because it pays off later in ways you will not see coming.
Up here and testify for me. I'm talking about Raymond. I'm talking about Raymond.
Hendrix, living in that house, made a serious impression on the youngest Isley in the family, an 11-year-old named Ernie. 11 years old, watching Jimi Hendrix practice in his own living room. So their own label, Hendrix on Guitar, a record they wrote, produced, and owned outright 4 years before anybody was calling that a strategy. And it failed.
Oh, yes, sir. No panic, baby.
Testify did not chart. Distribution was poor enough that the version with Hendrix's guitar work has been rarely heard since.
Come on, Ray, the genius. Come on and testify, son. Go ahead, son. Go ahead.
They moved T-Neck's distribution to Atlantic and put out 2 more singles. One of them, Move Over and Let Me Dance, with Hendrix playing again. Those failed too. That is the truth of what happened, and it deserves to be said clearly.
Tell the world about it. You got soul.
The Isley Brothers attempted independence 4 years before the industry would allow it to survive, and the machine simply starved them out. So when Berry Gordy came calling, understand what he was calling into.
Don't it make you wanna shout? Don't be ashamed.
3 exhausted men, a dead label, and a guitar player who had just left for good.
Burn this phone. I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
7 1965. Following those failures, with an offer on the table from Motown's Berry Gordy, the brothers decided to fold T-Neck. After meeting with Gordy, they shelved their own company and signed to Motown's Tamla imprint. They shelved their own company. The thing they built in 1964, the label named after their street, the label that got Jimi Hendrix onto a record before the world knew his name. They put it in a drawer and closed the drawer. Not because they stopped believing in it, because the industry made independence unaffordable, and Motown made dependence look like being rescued. And on paper, it was a rescue. Gordy had high hopes for them and assigned them immediately to Holland-Dozier-Holland, his top songwriting and production team. Understand what that meant in 1965. Holland-Dozier-Holland were the engine of that entire corporation. Where Did Our Love Go? Baby Love, Reach Out, I'll Be There. Being handed to them was not a courtesy. It was being handed the keys to the building. Some of the other Motown acts were reportedly jealous of the treatment the Isleys were getting. And I need to be honest with you about something, because this channel does not deal in villains and victims when the record says otherwise. The Isley Brothers did not arrive at Motown as unknowns being taken advantage of. They arrived as veterans. A decade of professional history, 2 records the whole industry had already copied, a label of their own in the drawer. They walked into a company that developed almost every artist in it from nothing, and they were not nothing. They were a functioning business that had run out of runway. That is the tension that eventually breaks this relationship. It is not cruelty, it is fit. Motown was a system, a brilliant, disciplined, world-changing system, and a system works by deciding who is first and who is second and who waits. The Isley Brothers had already spent 10 years being told to wait their turn by every label in America.
Bringing you back again, hurting me more and more.
Hold this name, Tamla, because the very first record they made under it became the biggest of their lives to that point. And it still wasn't enough. 1966. This Old Heart of Mine is Weak for You. You know this song. It has been part of your life for a long time. In films, at weddings, coming out of a car radio while somebody you love was driving. But knowing a song and knowing what it costs to make it are two different kinds of knowing. Let me give you the second one. It was a Holland-Dozier-Holland composition, and it was their first Motown release on Tamla. They cut it at Studio A, Hitsville, USA, in Detroit. It reached number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 6 R&B. It was certified gold, and the album that carried it entered the American R&B chart at number 15. That is not a modest result. By any honest measure, that is the group finally arriving. And listen to how Motown's own historians describe the recording itself. Motown regards This Old Heart of Mine as one of the finest works Holland-Dozier-Holland ever produced. Not one of the finest Isley records, one of the finest HDH records, full stop, from the team that wrote the soundtrack of the decade. So the machine worked. The best writers in Detroit. The best studio band in America. And Ronald Isley's voice sitting on top of it, doing the thing he had been doing since he was a boy in a church in Cincinnati. That grain, that catch in the throat, the gospel underneath the pop. Now I want to ask you the question that decides this entire story. And I want you to answer it honestly. If a system gives you the biggest hit of your career, does that mean the system values you? Because those two things feel identical from the outside. From the outside, a gold record settles the argument. The Isley Brothers were about to find out that it settles nothing. And I will say clearly what most people won't. The answer did not arrive in a meeting. It did not arrive in a memo or a contract dispute or a shouting match in a hallway. It arrived in something so small that most people who tell this story skip it entirely.
You don't have to worry.
It arrived on the front of the album. I know, that sounds like nothing. Wait until you see it. 5. The cover of their first Motown album. The jacket of This Old Heart of Mine featured white models. Not the Isley Brothers, not the three men who sang every single note on that record. Models. And I want to be careful and fair here, because being unfair would betray the whole point of this channel. This practice was not unique to Motown, and it was not unique to this one record. It was an industry-wide calculation about what a sleeve could look like and still be racked in certain stores in certain parts of this country in 1966.
I guess I'll always love you.
That context is real. Leaving it out would be dishonest. But context is not absolution. And the culture eventually delivered its own verdict on this exact practice, publicly and with a long memory. That cover was satirized in a scene in the 1991 film The Five Heartbeats, the musical drama about a fictional R&B vocal group. 25 years later, the image was still notorious enough to put in a movie. That is how deep it cut and how long it stayed cut. Now look at what was inside the sleeve, because that is where the second half of the message lives. The album is a genuine showcase for Ronald's vocals, and it is stacked with covers of hits by the Supremes, Martha and the Vandellas, and Marvin Gaye. A group with a decade of professional history, singing other Motown act songs, behind a cover photograph that does not contain them. That is the entire relationship compressed into one piece of cardboard. Your voice is welcome here, your material is optional, your face is negotiable. And I want to be precise about the injury, because it is not simply about race on a record jacket, although it is certainly that. It is about erasure as a business decision. Somebody sat in a room and concluded that this group would sell better if the buyer did not have to look at them. Talent without documentation is just genius with no witnesses. And this was worse than no documentation. This was documentation with the wrong faces in it. I guess I'll always love you. Whether the people who signed off on that cover understood exactly what they were saying to three brothers from Cincinnati, I think you already know the answer. 4. The follow-up. In that building, in that era, everything depended on what came next. Motown ran on momentum. A hit bought you a follow-up, and the follow-up decided whether you were an act or an experiment. What came next for the Isley Brothers was a slow, quiet slide. I Guess I'll Always Love You, another Holland-Dozier-Holland composition, came out in 1966. It reached number 61 on the Hot 100 and number 31 R&B, from number 12 to number 61 in a single step. The singles that came after it, like the frantic Got to Have You Back, did not climb very high in the United States at all. The Isleys said plainly what they believed was happening, that they were being handed leftover tracks from the label's staff writers. They had been moved off Holland-Dozier-Holland and reassigned to other producers in the building. Understand the mechanics of that. Motown's writing rooms produced material, and material got allocated. The Supremes, the Four Tops, the Temptations, Marvin Gaye. Those were the first calls. Everything below the first call received what remained after the first call had chosen. That is not a conspiracy. That is a ranking. And a ranking is a statement about who you are to the people who employ you. Motown's own history records it directly. Despite the early success of their debut, the Isleys became alienated from the label because it treated them as a second-string group. Second string, that is not my language. That is the record. And here is what makes that land the way it does on these three men specifically. They had already run their own label, They had already produced their own single. They had already made a decision in 1964 that they would rather own a failure than rent a success. You do not unlearn that. You can bury it under a gold record for 2 years. You can tell yourself the machine knows best, but you do not unlearn it. It sits there, and every time a lesser song shows up in your hands with somebody else's fingerprints on it, it gets louder. By 1968, they had stopped absorbing it. They asked to be let out of the contract. If this chapter is new to you, if you always assumed the Isleys were just a Motown act who eventually moved on, that is not your fault. But it does not have to stay that way. 3 England. While the American charts were letting them go, British record buyers were only getting started. Their Motown material was embraced in Britain in a way it never was at home. Tracks from the second album, Soul on the Rocks, It's Out of the Question, Behind a Painted Smile, Tell Me It's Just a Rumor, became UK favorites. The trio briefly relocated to England to be near it. Three men from Cincinnati, in their late 20s and 30s, packing up their lives and crossing an ocean because that was the only place left where the audience was waiting. I want you to hold the image of that. An American soul group standing on an English stage in 1968, being received like the important artists they had been for a decade, 6,000 kilometers from the country that made them. Now the numbers, because this is where it stops being poignant and starts being something harder. In 1968, British buyers turned a reissue of This Old Heart of Mine into a top 3 pop smash, a higher chart position than the record ever achieved in the United States. I Guess I'll Always Love You was reissued in Britain in 1969 and went to number 11, a far bigger hit than it had ever been in America. Behind a Painted Smile went into the UK top 5 later that same year. Now put the timeline in your hand and look at it. The Isley Brothers left Motown in December of 1968. Which means 2 of those 3 British hits belonged to a label the Isley Brothers no longer worked for. Motown was pushing their catalog into the British market after they were already gone. That is the sentence. Their records were finally being promoted, finally being campaigned, finally being treated like they mattered, at the precise moment the men who made them had walked out the door. And I want to be careful not to overstate it, because there is a defensible explanation. The British market moved on its own timetable, and reissues followed demand that had built up on its own. That is true. It is also true that demand does not press its own records. Somebody chose to service that market. Somebody just chose to do it late.
Let's pretend, dear, since you took your love.
The music survived, the relationship didn't, and those are not the same thing. Second December 1968, they asked to be let out. They complained about the leftover tracks, and they asked to be released from the contract. Gordy agreed. He let them go. And the first thing they did, the very first thing, was open the drawer they had closed in 1965 and take back out the company they had shelved. They resurrected T-Neck and secured distribution through Buddha Records. Then Ronald wrote a song. He wrote it after coming home from taking his daughter Tawana to school. He had the melody and part of the lyric in his head. He hummed it the entire way to his mother's house so he wouldn't lose it before he could get it on paper. O'Kelly and Rudolph helped him finish the words.
Do what you want to do what you want.
I want you to notice something about that. Not a writing camp, not an assignment handed down from a corridor of staff writers. A man in a car, coming back from the school run, holding a melody in his mouth so it wouldn't get away. They cut it in January 1969 at A&R Studios in New York. It took 2 takes. Ernie Isley played bass on it, his first appearance on an Isley Brothers record. The same kid who had watched Jimi Hendrix practice in the family living room. He was 16 years old. It's Your Thing was released on February 16, 1969. It went to number 2 on the Hot 100, and it gave them their first number 1 on the R&B chart. It sold over 2 million copies. It won the Grammy for Best R&B Vocal Performance by a Duo or Group at the 12th Annual Grammy Awards. Written by them, produced by them, released on a label with their street name on it. Now, this is the story I told you was coming, the one that was not neglect. The success of It's Your Thing reportedly irked Berry Gordy, the same man who had agreed to let them leave. He began making accusations that the record had been made while they were still at Motown. The group denied it. He threatened to sue them in an attempt to bring them back. He let them walk. They made the biggest record of their lives in 2 takes, and then he came for it. That was not a system being indifferent. That was a decision made by a person. It was eventually settled with the group. The song stayed theirs. And the last detail deserves to be said slowly. It's Your Thing was an artistic response to Gordy's hold on his artists. The album around it was called It's Our Thing, and it was themed on exactly that, independence, after the conflict with Motown.
Do what you want to do what you want.
They did not write a complaint. They wrote a groove that outlived the argument. One, what starting over actually bought them? Not a hit. They already knew how to make a hit. They had been making them, on and off, since 1959. What it bought them was 14 years of ownership. Between 1969 and 1983, the Isley Brothers released 18 albums on their own imprint, T-Neck. Distribution moved to CBS and Epic for most of the 70s and into the 80s. 18 albums on their label, and once nobody upstairs was allocating material to them, the music itself changed shape. In 1973, they made 3+3, the first record that officially expanded the family group from 3 members to 6, bringing in younger brothers Ernie and Marvin, along with Chris Jasper. It was released on August 7, 1973, on T-Neck through Epic. In 2020, Rolling Stone placed it at number 464 on its list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. The lead single was That Lady, and it was not new. They had been performing it since 1964 and had released it back then as Who's That Lady, a record that failed to reach the top 100. Nine years later, they rebuilt it with Latin percussion, organ, and a guitar solo. Ernie's playing, shaped by Hendrix and by Santana, became the defining sound of the group's entire era. A song they had owned since 1964. A guitar style learned from a man who slept in their house in 1964. Both of them worthless to the industry at the time. Both of them 9 years later worth everything. For one reason, because now the Isley Brothers owned the room where the decision got made. That is what leaving Motown was for. Not revenge, not freedom in the abstract. The right to decide when their own ideas were ready. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and their catalog became the ground other people built on. Ice Cube sampled Footsteps in the Dark for It Was a Good Day. Three generations of American music standing on records that would not exist if three tired men had stayed comfortable at Hitsville. And the label they folded in 1965, the one named after a street in New Jersey, the one that failed with a Jimi Hendrix single nobody bought, T-Nec's catalog now sits under Sony Music Entertainment. They shelved it once, because the industry gave them no other option. They were right the first time.